author known for his weekly column in the San Francisco Chronicle, which ran from 1972 until 2009. He has written books covering various aspects of rock music, including #1 New York Times bestseller, Red, My Uncensored Life in Rock with Sammy Hagar, and has interviewed a large number of musical artists. Selvin has published articles in Rolling Stone, the Los Angeles Times, Billboard, and Melody Maker, and has written liner notes for dozens of recorded albums. He's taught classes at San Francisco University, has lectured at Mills College and the University of California, Berkeley's Journalism Colloquium. He's appeared in documentaries about the music scene and has occasionally taken the stage himself as a rock and roll singer. We are thrilled to have Joel Selvin with us here today. Welcome.
Humble apologies. Thank you all for being so patient. Golly, I'm not sure I would have been. And caught me. I was so looking forward to this event too. Book Passage is such a favorite cultural institution of mine, and I felt honored to be invited in their public library event here. And I got up this morning and got into this book I'm writing, and I mean, when she called, I didn't know it was Friday. So that's how out of it I am. I must look terrible. I just literally put on a pair of shoes and came. So thanks for being here, and thanks for being so patient. I apologize. This isn't like this, but so I'll get past my embarrassment. This whole writing thing is so absorbing to me these days. It has been almost all my life, but you know, most of my writing I did for the Chronicle as a pop music critic. And, you know, 600-word pithy little reviews, and maybe on a weekend a 1,200-word feature. And now I'm throwing around these 90,000, 120,000-word manuscripts. It's a little bit different. I left the paper in '09 after 36 years. I was like 22 when they hired me as a staff. You can't imagine like what that felt like to be a 22-year-old and be given a full-time job to go write about rock bands. Most of my high school buddies were still in college. Anyway, you may have heard about the daily newspaper business. I was one of 120 Chronicle editorial employees to leave their jobs that year. It was astonishing. I call us the class of '09. There's a lot of big bylines too. There's Steve Wynn, Dara Lara, Carl Hall. I mean, it wasn't just the B team. And now they're putting out that newspaper with 250 people. And they all have to work really hard. And I want to tell you, if we thought that we would have had to work hard, none of us would have gone into the newspaper. So here I am in the middle of my 9th book since leaving the paper in '09. And I'm having a blast. I don't have any bosses. I don't have anybody bugging me. I don't have publicists calling me. I don't have to go out to clubs anymore. So it's been quite the adventure. When I got out of the paper, I went to New York and visited with my agent, and I asked him, was there any prospects in this book thing, and he said that every week Barnes & Noble's goes down, but every week Walmart goes up. And I said, Walmart? Sammy Hagar, a Walmart kind of guy? So I cooked up a book deal with Sammy, who I've known for a long time, and I thought with this, you know, darn if it wasn't a #1 bestseller. I thought, thought, this is going to be easy to switch and paint and spin. So I cooked up another book with somebody that I've known around town, the great tattoo artist, Ed Haddie. There's a household name, a great cultural contribution, fantastic story. And the publisher agreed too. The publisher said, man, you know, we're going to print 100,000 of these things, and it's going to be our lead item. And, I mean, you know, I was shopping vacation property. And that book sold 7,000 copies. But the real truth is that I don't care whether they sell. I can't be responsible for that. I can only be responsible for the work. And I really like the work. I mean, I'll put that Ed Haddie book up against the Sammy Hagar any day. As a matter of fact, it's considerably better than the Sammy Hagar because I learned all the lessons I learned in the Sammy Hagar book and applied them to the Ed book, just like the next one and the next one. They've all gotten better. 2014, I found a publisher who would support my Burt Burns biography. And Here Comes the Night, The Dark Soul of Burt Burns and the Dirty Business of Rhythm and Blues was published after 16 years of working on it. Now, I heard throughout that 16 years, I can't tell you how many times the question, who is Burt Burns? And this was always supplied as why would we want to publish this book? After all, who is Burt Burns? And I told him that was exactly the point, but that really was not persuasive. The book came out. I've never seen coverage of any of my work like this. It was in the New York Times twice, both as a book review and a major Sunday feature. It was on NPR 3 times. It just rolled out like insanity beyond my wildest dreams. Burt Burns, who is Burt Burns, was last year inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's who Burt Burns was. There's a documentary movie based on my book coming out next month, and there's a musical about to hit Broadway next year. That's who Burt Burns is. And this is like a lot different than giving some unknown rock band a good review and having a couple people go check them out as a result. This is astonishing. His widow just died, and having watched all this transpire in the final days of her life, she is a psycho and completely, I mean, she finished reading the book and she called her son that night in tears, sobbing, and still wouldn't mention my name, but, you know, told him that he'd been involved in this book and it worked out perfect. And the next morning she got up, and being in Nashville, she's a couple hours ahead of the West Coast where the publishing office was, and she saw something on the back cover that she didn't like, and it had a press release in her copy of the book, and she called my publicist and left a death threat on her voicemail. This girl's 22 years old, so knew the publishing business. Her first death threat, she was kind of upset. I told her, honey, wait a while, you'll get used to it. I used to get them all the time. But yeah, Eileen was something, and she lived to see all this, and her children, Cass and Brett, who were like, you know, brothers and sister to me, they were so young when their father died, they had no actual recollection of him. Yet they've lived in privilege and wealth all their lives because their father wrote Twist and Shout, Hang On Snoopy, Piece of My Heart, and another dozen or so songs that you can all sing. And instead of like sitting around on some Caribbean beach contemplating their good fortune, they've invested their whole lives into finding out who their father was and bringing his name back to life. And they've done it. They've done it with a book, a movie, and a musical. And this is this sort of astonishing thing that I found I could get involved in once, like, out of the newspaper business. Now, this Altamont book, was just a perfect example of how just much fun this can be. I don't know. I may be one of the few people that had fun with Altamont. It's was suggested to me, you know, by an editor that I worked with both on the Sammy Hagar book and a book with the songwriter L.A. Reid that was out in also in 2016. Yeah, it was a nice book. And working with L.A. Reid was just a great honor and opportunity. But Matt, the editor, is sort of after dinner talk, you know, what else you got lying around kind of thing, you know? What do you know about? And I mentioned this Altamont thing. It's been a part of my purview since I came to work at the Chronicle starting in 1970. The stench was still in the air. And over the course of time, I came to know not only the performers who played there, but people who attended. I myself did. And people who worked on the show. And in 1993, I wrote a book called Summer of Love that was ostensibly a complete account of the sort of San Francisco music scene in the 60s. And needless to say, Altamont was a big part of that. So I had a whole bunch of research done on it already, sort of sitting around. But you know, it didn't strike me as like an obvious idea. It was just stuff that was sitting in my files. But Matt's going, yeah, this is a good idea, right? And so I started putting together a proposal. And again, I'm new at this gig, right? I don't know exactly how to do everything. For instance, how much research do you put into your proposal before you shop it to the book publisher, as opposed to the research you do after they give you a contract? One, you're not being paid for, and you're investing and speculating your own time and efforts, and the other is a professional enterprise. So, and also, I wasn't that convinced on this story idea. Maybe, you know, somebody else would call me with a nice big money offer to write another book with them. And so I was dogging it, you know. And there were things that were difficult to do, like finding a police report. That took 6 months. And maybe I didn't need the police report for the proposal, right? But you know what I'm saying? So I go down at one point to Monterey to speak with Rock Scully, which was always a pleasure. Rock was the original manager of the Grateful Dead. He and his partner, Danny Rifkin, picked them up when they were a bunch of hooligans, and those guys were out at SF State. And Rock, it was a lovely day. Just one of those beautiful days in Monterey. Sun shining, we ate outdoors, had a nice lunch. Rock looked so good I kept taking pictures of it. It was just like, God, man, I haven't seen you look this good. You know? And he told me over lunch the story of how Altamont began. I drove home thinking, like I had a gold nugget in my pocket. This story is just how a book begins. Then I went back and tucked it away and didn't work on the proposal right away or anything. About 2 months later, Rock died. Obviously, he'd been sick when I met with him. Didn't say anything. He looked so good. He was so handsome and vital and robust. It came as a complete shock. I've been Rock really, you know, what we might laughingly call all my adult life. And he'd never been anything but charming and congenial with me. And I'm sure all the other stories are true too. But I realized this stuff was evaporating, and I needed to do this. And I needed to do it now. And in fact, the Oakland police, the Alameda County sheriffs who were responsible for investigating this event, estimate there were 40 Hells Angels there. That's all, by the way. On the other hand, It's about 40% of the entire membership of the whole Hells Angels at that time. So, but their force as a social evil has always been greatly amplified in the public imagination. Anyway, I mentioned this, 40 of them, I found 3 alive. Now, the actuarial tables are probably tougher on the Hells Angels than the rest of us. Nevertheless, and one of them, Sonny Barger, he can't talk because he's a throat breather now. So, the book came out pretty easy. I found the right people to talk to. I knew who to ask. The big lucky break was in first starting the research. We pulled together all the little newspaper clips, and it seems that in 2006, some sheriff's homicide investigator over in Alameda County closed a cold case. And at that point, got a little of press all over the world, like 1 inch, Altamont case finally closed, no second shooter. I believe the Kennedy case is still open. Anyway, I looked the guy up, and he's retired from the sheriff's office, and he's a private investigator in Hayward. So I called Scott up, and I tell him I'm working on this book, and asked him, did he know anything about the vehicular manslaughter case? And he goes, what vehicular manslaughter case? So we're in business. And Scott was fantastic at getting the police report. I mean, this is a guy that can call up the sheriff of Alameda County, get him, hey Bob, or I'm sorry, I did speak to the guy, and I don't remember his name. He was very helpful. I should be more respectful to our officers. But he can get this guy on the phone and get the police report happening. He knows a lot of the old cops that were there. Those guys had great stories. I mean, I talked to a guy who was a 26-year-old sheriff's deputy serving out at the substation out in Santa Rita, which is the closest to the Altamont site. And this is not exactly a thriving little cop shop. 2 patrol cars. One covers the city of Dublin, and the other goes east of Livermore all the way up to like Pleasanton on the north and Sunol on the south, 900 square miles. And once those cars went over the Altamont Pass, they were out of radio contact with the substation, so they were pretty much on their own. Anyway, George was 28 years old, and that day he was acting watch commander for the first time in his career. His boss was sick. And this thing just dropped out of the sky on him on a Friday morning. They had no idea what was going on. It starts with another officer, Cliff Diaz, going out at 8 in the morning, going home, and the phone rings, and he picks up the phone, and the person on the phone says, what's this about, a concert with the Rolling Stones at Altamont Speedway? Cliff doesn't know what the hell's going on, and the other 2 guys who are working in the office are on the phone, and he's going home. So he says, I don't know nothing, hangs up, writes a note, and he's never heard of the Rolling Stones. And then he leaves it and goes home, right? So about 5 o'clock that night, he starts driving home, and driving back to work. And he notices traffic's a little heavier than usual. But all he has to do is get to Santa Rita, right? And it's just, it hasn't bottled up by the time you get there. And they tell him, oh man, you take the station wagon and you go down there and see what's happening, right? And he told me this thing, and it's in the book, and it's just amazing. I mean, this guy just launched, right? And the freeway's too thick, so he goes off the side roads. This is his 900 square miles. He's done this how many times? There aren't people out here. There aren't cars out here. So he's on Midway Road, which is this tiny little 2-lane road with no side, right? Just, cut through the pasture. And people are just shoving cars off it, walking down the road. It's wholly bizarre. It's like driving through a herd of cattle. See, dumps off that, goes around back, over where the highway is and around the ridge till it comes out on south of Altamont on a promontory. He looks out there, it's midnight. He sees about 10,000 campfires. He sees a stage being built under highway construction lamps, those big yellow lamps. He's got helicopters going coming in and out. He thinks could be 30, 50,000 people. You can hear a lot of chatter, you can hear guitars, and it just, I can't believe what he sees. Who could? So he's out of radio range, right? And he'd been told to, like, you know, establish a presence. So he goes back into radio range. He hears a radio report of 2 fires. One of them he never can find. Some barn's supposed to be burning down. The other's a bridge, and he gets to the bridge, and the bridge is definitely, like, you know, been burned, but the fire's over. And he's just like, you know, I think I'm gonna go back to San Rita, not too much I can do out here. That was Cliff, and then, you know, that all these guys got taken over by some cop from downtown who were like, I'll handle this, and, you know, they just sat up on a hill and watched it there. That was how they handled it. Yeah, I think, yeah, enjoy the music. Yeah, they had a bakery truck that was used in some kind of drug surveillance thing, and they sat up there with binoculars with the bakery truck, and radio the people in the bakery truck. And then when Meredith Hunter was killed, like this, they got called from the Eden Township station to the Santa Rita station to the bread truck. Oh, there's been a murder. Oh, we better go cheese. That was also fun, the murder investigation. Let me say it wasn't really done with any great enthusiasm, you know. It took 90 days to find anybody close to a suspect. It had been photographed, it had been filmed, it had about 100,000 witnesses, and it was all in the light of day. I mean, okay, good work, good police work. But I don't think they had any enthusiasm. It was just hippies and black people and, you know, drug addicts. You know, it's just, you know, it's not. And by the way, the Hell's Angel in question, the one that was eventually arrested, was acquitted as having acted in self-defense. The victim had a gun in his hand. When you have a gun in your hand, you can be stabbed to death. That's the rules. The whole thing had never really been described quite accurately. And the Hells Angels are always so easy to, like, pawn off any kind of blame for. And it's so complicated, but let me just explain how the Hells Angels ended up there, okay? Because the original plan, as Rock Scully dreamed it up late one night in London with Keith Richards, staying up, smoking California Sensimilla, something Keith Richards had never seen before. I was going to take a permit out. It was going to be a Jefferson Airplane Grateful Dead concert in Golden Gate Park. Police, infrastructure, water, toilets, public transportation. And then 24 hours before the event, the Rolling Stones would be announced as a special guest. What did you do? Well, the Stones could never hold still for that. But before that went awry, Rock took Sam Cutler, who was the Stones tour director, stage manager, to meet with some San Francisco Hells Angels, on the assumption that they're coming anyway, let's invite them, let's get them in the tent, pissing out. It's Lyndon Johnson's expression, I believe. And so they met over at Ken Kesey's apartment with a couple of guys, a few people that were officials of Hells Angels, but not necessarily executives. Pete Nell was like the vice president of the San Francisco chapter. But Nell explained to Sam, like, we're not cops. We're not going to be your security guards. We'll come and hang out. We'll be as helpful as we care to be. And we'll enjoy your hospitality. And Sam says, what do you like? So we like beer. So Sam agreed to buy $500 worth of beer. We all know that. Could be one of the most famous financial transactions of the 20th century. Had the concert taken place in Golden Gate Park, the San Francisco chapter would have held jurisdiction. Now, the San Francisco chapter of the Hells Angels were well known to the bands. They hung out backstage, they rode bikes together, they did drug business together. They were altogether more civilized than, say, the San Jose chapter. Now, the San Jose chapter was newly formed. It had been formed that summer after a vicious turf war with a group called the Gypsy Jokers, who'd been annihilated. And the San Jose chapter was formed up of some Gypsy Jokers, some South San Francisco Angels, and altogether a different cultural matter than the guys who were living in San Francisco. The Hells Angels chapter in San Francisco, its headquarters was on Ashbury Street across the street from the Grateful Dead's house. They were very much part of the Haight-Ashbury scene. The San Jose guys, not so much. And the San Francisco chapter arrived that day out at Altamont in their own bus. They had a school bus. And they were parked backstage, and you can see them in the movie standing on the top of their school bus, keeping full beer cans and bands. But the guys in front with the pool cues that you're all so familiar with, San Jose and San Jose prospects. Now, a prospect is an aspiring member who can be voted out by as few as 2 votes. And these guys were like indentured servants. They were known to act out. When I spoke to one of the few remaining San Francisco chapter members who was there, a gentleman called Flash, I asked him about the pool cue thing. And he said, I mean, he just was so disrespectful about that, like pool cues. See, pool cues are bush league as far as he was concerned. It was for chumps, it was for idiots, because you can't get close to anybody with a pool cue. If you're going to hit somebody with a pool cue, you have to be standing away from them, and they break. Flash said, if you want to mess somebody up, use a tire chain. But so he didn't have much respect for those idiots with the pool cues either. And in fact, the angels that were there that day, many of them were extremely helpful. I know I spoke to the head of medical services. He had a Hells Angel friend who was associated with him all day. Very helpful. I know the film crew that I spoke to all were very appreciative of the assistance they received from the Hells Angels. I talked to people who were in the Grateful Dead who were working with Hells Angels. And we have these people's names now, and they're in the book. And that was one of the things I really, really wanted to do. Because for 45 years, this whole thing has been Hells Angels this, Hells Angels that. I wanted their names. I wanted to know the names of the guys who hit people, and I wanted to know the names of the guys who helped people. And I wanted to make them human beings again, not just Hells Angels. Because I've watched for all this time while the Rolling Stones were able to avoid any kind of serious responsibility for what was most certainly their fault by able to hand it off to, oh, it was the Hells Angels. Well, yeah, Paul Hibbets caused a lot of problems. That was the guy that they all called Animal, who was wearing Dead Coyote as a hat that day. He was the guy that not only beat up Marty Ballin, the vocalist for the Jefferson Airplane, but he also cold-cocked Rex Jackson, the head of the Grateful Dead's roadie crew. And in many respects, that was a far more significant beating. And that was another incident that was never revealed until this book. Just, I mean, Rex's girlfriend didn't even know about it. Yeah, that's why he came home with black eyes, Eileen. Oh, wow. Paul Hibbets, yeah. Terry the Tramp, no way. Terry the Tramp was there trying to defend and protect the Grateful Dead. He was depressed, he was angry, he went off by himself and sulked in the crowd for a couple of hours because there's not too much you can do once the Hells Angels start breaking loose if you're another Hells Angel. Excuse me, Bob, you shouldn't do that. No, the rule is, if the Hells Angel's in a fight, you're in the fight with it. That's the rule. So these people were caught in a situation that they didn't necessarily like either. And that's been one of the things that I wanted to explain so long. Why the Rolling Stones get a pass and the Hells Angels get all the blame? I don't know. The Rolling Stones came here in 1969 because they were broke, they needed money, and there's all their funds were bottlenecked by a unscrupulous manager who was not paying them. And there's every evidence that these guys were just hit this country like a pirate crew. I mean, I had somebody bring over a file folder full of unpaid bills. And it's real clear what their strategy was on this tour. Is they would book hotels and leave, not check out. They would book rental cars and then they would change rental car agencies. And they did the same things with airline tickets. They had a travel agency that booked all the first third, and then they would start looking for their $33,000 bill, and oops, new travel agency. And in fact, the lawsuits over these unpaid bills lasted until 1976. It was a money run. It was a very greedy, desperate money run. And when they got here and found that there was more goods and more spoils and more riches than they had imagined, then inflamed their greed. And as a result, their judgment, whatever it had been, went out the window. And they were going to have this free concert and have the climactic part to their Woodstock-type movie come hell or high water. They were in Alabama recording on Tuesday with the concert planned and announced for Saturday without a site. On Tuesday, they found the Sears Point Raceway up in Sonoma and cut a deal with the people who were on the site. They moved in sound gear and started building a stage. On Wednesday, the corporate owners of Sears Point discovered that this deal was in place. Corporate owners were in the movie business. They did not believe the Rolling Stones were doing this for charity. They wanted a piece of the movie. They wanted to distribute the movie. And they wanted a fee for the rental of their facility. Not an unreasonable position. The Rolling Stones refused to negotiate, refused to budge, not a nickel. They got to give it to us for free. We're going to do this for free. We want it for free. The movie, you know, they said it was for Vietnamese orphans. On Thursday afternoon, this guy, Dick Carter, who owns the Altamont Speedway, calls the Rolling Stones lawyer and says, "We can do it here." He's had this place for about a year. It's been open for about 2 years. The biggest crowd he's ever had is 6,000 people for a demolition derby. It's a dump on the edge of nowhere. They haven't even finished building the highway out there to 280. It's still just a 4-lane road. But they have to check it out. So Rock Scully is dispatched with, get this, Michael Lang, the producer of Woodstock. We're not really sure what he's doing here, but he's turned up. And they have a traffic helicopter over in Nevada where the dead office is. They fly Lang and Scully over there, Rocks. Gets over that hill and comes down over this track, and he looks out and he sees mounds of wrecked cars from the demolition derby. He sees all these oil stains, broken glass. He's thinking, what the? And that's when Michael Lang goes, "This is perfect! We can do this here!" And that's Thursday afternoon. So they start helicoptering pieces of the gear that they can get loose over Sears Point over there. They're on the radio calling for volunteers with trucks to help move gears, like some kind of rock and roll Dunkirk. And they're bringing gear in from San Francisco and from the dead, and they're working all through Friday night in the dark without flashlights. I understand that putting speakers in phase without flashlights in the dark is quite challenging. They get it done. Hippies, they were amazing. Yeah, they were still plugging in cables at noon when Santana starts. But they got it. They're running it off 2 generators Had no real power out of the ground. They had 100 toilets. That's 300,000 people, 100 toilets. You do the math. 300,000 people, by the way, is the size of Fresno. And they're just parked on this hill. Most people are familiar with the killing of Meredith Hunter, 18-year-old black kid who was stomped and knifed to death during the Stone set in front of the stage. It's an amazing, dramatic story. There were 3 other deaths. There was a kid who drowned himself, just foolishly jumping into the canal. And there were 2 deaths in this post-concert vehicular manslaughter. And Scott Dudek, my private investigator who worked with me on this, Scott found Jim McDonald. Mac was a survivor of that. And I met with him. He's a just a fantastic, lifelong stoner, surfer, fireman from Santa Cruz. Just the sort of guy you'd love to go hang out with and have a beer with. And he had such recollection of this day of hitchhiking up from Santa Cruz. This gal picked him up in this type of car and took him here and then got this ride there. I mean, got this whole thing. Remember, he gets to the concert, he runs into a bunch of high school friends and drops some acid and, just had a terrific time. He knew that there were some problems during the Stone set, but, they worked it out. On the way home, he's walking through the crowd that's leaving, and there's a car sort of slowly going up the hill, and he says, "Hey, gotta get a ride." He said, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to Santa Cruz." He said, "Well, we're going to San Francisco." He says, "That's close. Oh, that's good." And you hop in. There's always room for one more. There's a girl sitting in the front seat with an infant on her lap. There's 2 more guys in the front, and there's 3 guys in the back. 2 guys, you start to, they know each other from East Coast. They just moved out here. They're about Mac's age. And, they're driving this car very slowly through the crowd because everybody's walking up there. They get up to the highway and still a lot of traffic, so they decided to park across the street and set up a campfire and wait for the traffic to drive. Now, Mac has been through the Altamont Pass hitchhiking the night before. So before he came up here, he knew that it gets cold at night. He put a blanket in his knapsack. He reached into the knapsack and pulls out his blanket, wrapped it around himself, grabbed the blanket in his hands, and snugged it up tight against himself. And the next thing he knows, somebody's put his hand on his shoulder and says, "Hey, this one's still alive." He gets medevaced over to Livermore in a California Highway Patrol helicopter. He thinks he's in an ambulance. And the bedside manner of the paramedic believes something to be desired. He keeps screaming at Mac, "Don't die on me! Don't die on me!" But, Mac fucking died on it. And he went into the hospital with no vital signs. Well, they brought him back, obviously, or I couldn't have done the interview, but they sent his mother came up and picked up his, he was alive, so they're not his effects, they're still his belongings. And she had the blanket. The blanket, one side of it, Mac's body, is outlined in spurts of blood. The other side is tire tracks. Otherwise, we had a great time. I'm just asking. So, that's what, the Altamont book, it's good and grim, but I can't believe that the story was lying around for me to write rather than some higher priced, better writer. But there it was all these years later, and I'm grateful for it. It's a terrific book. And this morning, while you guys were waiting here so patiently for my sorry ass, I was in the midst of trying to figure out what happened to the Grateful Dead after Jerry Garcia died. That book's due in June, and it'll be out next year, and it's grim and unrelenting in its own way, but nobody dies. Jerry's dead when the book starts. Vince dies, that's right. And Grandma. All right, so, any questions? Yes, right here, right away.
When you say that the Rolling Stones, you felt that they kind of just whitewashed themselves out of what happened, how were they complicit in what happened?
Well, it was their concert. It was their people that they set in motion to design the concert. When you press the Rolling Stones about it, and they get past the Hells Angels did all this, they'll tell you, well, we trusted the Grateful Dead. And, Rock Scully said, we've done this hundreds of times. I wondered about that sometimes. I wondered, did Keith think that, like, on Monday morning, Rock got up and put on a coat and tie and went to an office? Because he's like the Grateful Dead's manager. He took as much acid as those guys. He was as responsible or irresponsible as those guys. I mean, he wasn't like the Rolling Stones manager, he was a banker, right? So I don't know what they thought of Rock, like, did they make him as a responsible figure or not? I wouldn't have. I knew Rock, he didn't look like one. But when I say, and this is got in great detail in the book, and you have to make the case of this thing, because going into it, my editor was convinced, no, man, you have to get out of this having pointed fingers, laid blame, made responsible parties culpable. This is not just a narrative. So it's laid out in considerable detail, this motivation, these unpaid bills, this cinematic exercise, the condition of their career at that time, the kind of people that they used in their business dealings. Running the tour for the Rolling Stones was somebody they did not know, that they did not pay. It wasn't on their payroll. He showed up when they came to Los Angeles and told them that he worked for Chrysler and he'd get them free cars. He did get them free cars because he told Chrysler he worked for the Rolling Stones and he gave him an endorsement. His name was John Ellsworth. Nobody knew that at the time. They knew him as John James. He was a witness protection program escapee. And he later was found participating in some deal at the Carter White House, pretending to be Santa Claus for some non-existent children charity, and died shortly after doing, in 2006, shortly after being released from federal prison on fraud charges. And that was the guy who signed the agreement to use Altamont Speedway on behalf of the Stones. So I guess they weren't going to have any legal problems, because he was the guy who signed the document, didn't work for him. They didn't even know who he was. And in fact, he wasn't the person who he said he was. He couldn't be Mr. James. His name was Chase. Back there, you have a question.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about him, but
Here's his views.
yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable how disorganized it all was. When you're living at that time, you think Rolling Stones, they've got their stuff together, they got managers, but they were all doing it just kind of haphazard.
The entire music, rock and roll business at that point, 1969, was just, cut above a racket. And there was not perceived as a big money operation, so the corporations really ignored it. This particular tour was one that sort of established the idea of the American tours being able to make real money. The Stones doubled existing ticket prices and charged $7.50 for top tickets. But, that's quite a substantial increase from $3.50. And they were able to do 2 shows at night in Oakland and Los Angeles arenas, doing 30,000 tickets and plus. 3 shows at Madison Square Garden. All this was news at the time. There were no touring bands that had their own stages and lights. That was the first time that had ever been done, when you took your own sound, your own stage, your own lights. Had never been done before. It was the beginning of a very innocent time. Woodstock. This is another thing I mentioned in the book. Woodstock had taken place in August. Now, we all have this image of Woodstock, right, as this fantastic, wonderful event. I'm not sure that's really fair. First of all, they tore down the fences. They blocked the throughway. Governor Rockefeller was that close to sending in the National Guard. And the concert goers, when they saw the concession prices, they burned down the hot dog stand. 4 people were killed there. I mean, it's like, okay, everybody had a great spirit and really managed to make it through that event, but it was close to being a disaster. One click to the left, and it would have been just a massive catastrophe. And they dodged a major bullet that it wasn't something more along the lines of an Altamont. These things were a product of a very naive and innocent time. And the music business and the whole public assemblage thing had just not really been built up and worked out. Yes, ma'am.
You know, often you think of Altamont as, or you read at the time, that it was the turning point. You know, the peace and love of the hippie movement was over. And, you know, when you talk about Altamont, it was obviously poor planning and the organizers and et cetera that created this catastrophe at Altamont. Why do you think that the image of this was the turnaround to the beautiful people's vision of what life could be like just after this one event? Or maybe I've blown this event out of proportion, perhaps that's not the case.
No, I think that's a common perception around Altamont. It doesn't hurt that it was December 1969, right? It was the end of the 60s in a calendar sense. I think that it's a simplistic thing to say that that was the end of all this stuff, and it wasn't. It wasn't the end of the counterculture, it wasn't the end of the underground, it wasn't the end of rock bands playing for free in open meadows. It wasn't even the end of the Hells Angels attending those concerts. But it certainly was a handy symbol of a convergence of many factors, both factionalism in the counterculture and the whole counterculture's collision course with the establishment. All these things were in play that day at Altamont. So from a sociological or social historical point of view, it was kind of complex. It wasn't really the end of the 60s. It certainly, you know, I mean, that gosh darn war had another 6 years to go. So it's a richly emblematic event, just beyond belief, especially, and I'm looking around here, okay, especially colored America, Black America. And I'm not seeing, you know, we all look like Caucasians for the most part in here, but you have to understand that in the Black community, Meredith Hunter is an entirely different kind of symbol than it is to us as white, bourgeois, former hippies that we may or may not be. To us, this is a young black guy with a white girlfriend who was murdered by Hell's Angels in front of the stage while the Rolling Stones played. Now that, my God, is symbolic enough. But from an African American perspective, add in the phraseology, well, he was somewhere he shouldn't have been. And everything takes on a different slant. And Meredith Hunter is as well known in the Black community as he is in the white, just for different reasons. So,
I wanted to ask you about Meredith Hunter. I'm sure it's covered in the book. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I read a bunch of stuff about him on the internet, and what they said was something happened. He didn't walk in there with a gun. Something happened in the early part of the concert.
His girlfriend told me that they parked, they walked toward the concert, and he goes, oh, wait a minute, I forgot my gun.
Oh, okay.
She thinks he was up all night the night before doing speed. It was certainly in his bloodstream in the autopsy. Meredith Hunter. Let me tell you about Meredith Hunter, okay? His mother, still alive, was a schizophrenic prostitute. He was raised largely by a sister who was 10 years older. She herself the product of a rape. When Meredith got to be about 10 years old, mother associated with a particularly vicious and violent pimp, and the family that surrounded the mother, there were some family members nearby, took it upon themselves to move the older sister, Dixie, to San Francisco where she could be, she was about 19 and they thought, not good to be around this house. That left Meredith, his younger brother Donald, and a younger sister to be cared for by this schizophrenic and probably drug-addicted prostitute with the vicious. Almost immediately, they put the little girl in foster care, and she didn't know about this family until she was grown. Donald and Meredith almost immediately went into CYA, Youth Authority. Meredith's record starts when he's 11 years old, and his sister does not remember what he was arrested for. The official record says willful juvenile. Now, I don't know what kind of jive charge that is, but you can imagine. Anyway, he's booked 3 more times over his teen years. The charges are all just chump stuff like breaking and entering, car theft. There's no violence on his record. There's nothing like that. But he's pretty much spent his entire teen years. Oh, parole violations, back 3 times on parole violations. So from age 11 till age 18, he's pretty much in the state CYA. He gets out that May, and he met Patty Bredehoff in June or July. And they formed what was a very intensely romantic and adult kind of relationship almost immediately. And it was a very serious relationship, and it developed quite a bit at the time that they went out to Altamont together. Patty was a very, very pretty, blonde, white girl. Meredith was a duded up, big afro, fancy-ass black guy that liked to sell little $5 matchboxes over in Provo Park next to Berkeley. He wasn't really like a big-time gangster or anything. He was just a punk. And, you know, just one of those marginal pieces of our society that's just been ignored and abused all his life. Imagine that, you know, the kind of perspicacity and diligence it took just for him to be who he was in the face of the onslaught that he'd known since he was a kid. His sister, Dixie, and I spoke a number of times, and those are some of the most touching interviews of the whole thing. I also spoke to Patty a couple of 3 times too. And she's a tragic figure whose life has never been the same.
Joel, just related to that, when he pulls the gun out, was he aiming to shoot one of the ankles?
We can't answer that, can we?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you what happened was that he went to try and climb up the stage, and he was shoved down by one of the Hells Angels who was sitting on the stage. He got back up and got in that guy's face, and that guy shoved him back, and 4 or 5 angels came on from behind and pulled him down and started kicking him and beating him. He got loose from those guys. This is in the film. He gets loose from that scrum, and backs up and pulls the gun out of his waistband. And it gets it about like here. And Alan Pissarro, who's standing about 10 feet away, does it's like a ballet move. He's got a knife down in his ankle, and he has to turn around like this, pull the knife out, and then turn around again and jump. And it's like a ballet thing. He lands on Hunter's back, stabs him in the neck. They go down on the ground together. He stabs him 4 more times. Now the Hells Angels pile on Hunter's body. They separate Pissarro from the body. They kick him. They stand on him. Finally, they leave him alone, and a couple of people from the crowd pick his body up and manage to make their way through the audience. They put it on the lip of the stage, right in front of Keith Richards. Now, forever, the Rolling Stones have maintained they never knew anything about this. That is a lie, like so many of their lies about this. I spoke to someone who worked for the Grateful Dead, whose job was to stand on stage and watch the Grateful Dead equipment. The Grateful Dead were not in a position to have broken microphones. And she watched this body get dropped right in front of Keith Richards' feet and watched Keith Richards jump back as the Hells Angels swarm over Hunter's body and push it back off the stage. You look in the book, you'll see a picture of that group of Hells Angels bent over. You can't see what they're doing, but you can see Mick Jagger. He's going, looking away like this. Oh my God, what did I just see there? The band falls apart. You see this much in the movie. A few minutes in the movie. In real life, it's 15, 20 minutes. They try and play a blues number, that doesn't work. Everybody is like completely discombobulated. You also have to understand, there's no spotlights. They never arrived, although they did use the steel to build the towers. Consequently, the stage is only 4 feet tall. All they have is 50,000 watts of backlight. So instead of being blinded, like most performers are, they're looking out into an audience that is illuminated. They can see everything. They can see all the pool cues coming down. They can see all the blood. They can see all the beatings. And they're standing there watching this stuff out of control. They can't stop it. Mick Jagger's never been like this in his life. And you can tell how fearful and intimidated these people are. The Hells Angels feel free to walk right across their faces, right through this. Finally, 22-year-old Mick Taylor says, how about the new song? They recorded and written a new song that Tuesday. And Jagger goes, okay, let's do the new song. So for the first time in Rolling Stones history, they performed Brown Sugar. And it rocks! And the whole show comes back together. Now, if you were to watch the Gimme Shelter movie, you would be forgiven for thinking that after Meredith Hunter's death, the Rolling Stones packed it up and went home. They played for another hour. They stayed on that stage and they did their show. They were terrified. Adrenaline was rushing through them. There were 200 people surrounding them. There were people getting beaten all throughout the set, right in front of their vision. They'd seen a dead body flopped on their stage. And what did they do? They played like their lives depended on it. I listened to a 16-track mix of this done by Bob Matthews of the Grateful Dead. You never, ever hear this anywhere except Bob's living room. The Rolling Stones will never allow this to be released. But let me tell you, they played great. Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman locked down that rhythm section. Keith Richards and Mick Taylor, those guitars were like gears grinding together. And Jagger's singing like he means it. None of those loopy sort of caricatures that he often lapses into. Man, he is a sincere mother tonight. And they put on a show that just barrels to the end. They don't even pause between the last number and the encore. And when they're done with that street fighting, man, they are pushing their way through a hole in the fence headed for a helicopter that has been reserved for them. Now, one more thing. In that movie, there's a really powerful scene where they show Patty, Meredith's girlfriend, sobbing, crying, and his body being taken on a gurney right past her. Remember that scene, anybody? hard to forget. And then they cut to a shot of the bottom of the helicopter going, taking off like that, right, you know? What a lie. His body was never helicoptered out of there. They took his body to the office and sat there stinking up the place until the Alameda County meat wagon decided there was going to be no traffic and came out and got him. Now, I exchanged emails with a guy named Stephen Lighthill, who was a cameraman that day. Went on to become head of the AFI, was just magnificently dignified, distinguished cinematographer. And I said, wait a second, you know, what did the Masons do? How could they put that in there? And he wrote back, he said, yes, the helicopter shot is very powerful until you realize it's a lie. So now, keep that in mind next time you think about Gimme Shelter. Okay, this movie has the sense about it that it's a truthful documentary, right? Oh, well, like all that horrible scene at the end where Mick gets up looking ashen after seeing Hunter killed and all that. It seems like it's warts and all. No, it's 50% owned by the Rolling Stones. They had to sign releases for it to be released. And the Maysles made a movie that the Rolling Stones would accept. That's the truth. And put that helicopter in, taking Meredith's body away, which was a complete and utter lie. It's proof positive that they were absolutely not non-fiction filmmakers. That just undermines everything they did as far as I'm concerned. And I like the movie. It's a great movie, but it's a lie.
So I assume you would talk to Sam Cutler about this.
Many, many times.
Yeah, but none of the Stones.
Stones didn't have any interest in having this discussion. Yeah.
Two questions. The second of which is, so what was the reaction from the Rolling Stones on who came out, number one? Well, that's the second question, but the first question, how, Woodstock hadn't just happened, and I think people sort of knew, like, if they hadn't been there, but I don't know if Cutler or Rock Scully or any of those people had been there with the Dead, and that was kind of like a disastrous, the Dead, and it was weird there. So when Michael Lang and Rock Scully went out to see Altamont, was Rock Scully not asking any questions in his head like, well, this guy thinks this is a great site, I don't know about what I'm seeing versus
Rock
what he
said,
said. They needed the site so
this is the guy
badly.
that did Woodstock. Who am I?
Oh, okay.
He was like, you know, and you're right, they had that horrible
Yeah,
Woodstock.
they were not happy
They
there.
had short circuits on the stage, and every time they went up to a microphone, it was like live, and it was the wind was so strong, and the rain was so strong during their set, it knocked their speed down. Well, they had a horrible time. I think they played badly, but I'm not sure they did. I just watched the video a few months ago, and I thought they played great. But
They played great.
yeah, differently, that's for sure. So you know.
So he was acceding to.
Yeah, I mean,
Lang
the
was-
Magic Woodstock was nobody was
Still happy
admitted to
about
that.
that, right.
Nobody was good. And as for the Rolling Stones, somebody asked me, did I think Mick Jagger had read it in my book? And I said, no, but his lawyer has.
So they weren't trying to counter anything in the press or?
I think that they learned a long time ago to leave it alone. They've been accused of worse things than I accuse them of.
It's been a long day, so let's take just one or two more questions at most.
Very good, sir.
How come Bill Graham was not involved?
Bill Graham hated free concerts. He couldn't make any money off them. And as a matter of fact, Bill Graham was so pissed at the Rolling Stones. He really was not the Bill Graham he came to be at that point. His first big concert outside of the Fillmore was that October at the Open Coliseum with the Rolling Stones. And during the early show, there were 2 shows that night, during the early show, he was trying to do some crowd control. Bill was a hands-on kind of guy, and Charlie Watts said to Sam Cutler, the tour director, stop that. That guy's rough, handling that girl so roughly, stop him. So Sam goes over and pulls Bill off some girl who's trying to climb up on the stage, and Bill, of course, in full Bill Graham says, how dare you do this? Don't you know this is my stage? And Sam says, wrong, mate, this is the Rolling Stones stage. And socks him. And the 2 of them get in a fist fight on stage during the Stones set, rolling around, you know, while Jagger's looking, right? So in between shows, Bill's all pissed off. He wants to go get the Stones, right? You know, get this guy Sam fired. And the Stones are all huddled behind the dressing room. You know, they don't know this Bill Graham is. He's just some chump they're taking for a bunch of dough. And he comes in all, you know, and Jagger doesn't even look out of the mirror. He just talks to Bill from the mirror. I'm doing my makeup, you know what? The show must go on, Mr. Graham. As for Sam, he works for me. I'll decide what to do with Sam. So Bill hated the Stones.
One last question, anyone? No? Joe will be signing books here.
Happy New Year. Thank you very much.